Then on Sports Central, we go for our 2022 college football predictions for the Virginia Cavaliers, team that went 6-6 overall in the 2021 season. But how this team be in 2022 and whether or not Virginia's a potential ACC dark horse going into next season is what we go over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predict their schedule game by game in this video, starting up with their team trends. Virginia 6-6 last season. They were 4-2 in their first 6 games, 2-4 in their last 6, and obviously finished out the season at 6-6. They were supposed to play in a bowl game. They were supposed to play SMU in the Fenway Bowl, but unfortunately that game got canceled. So Virginia finished out the season at 6-6 without a bowl game. Last season wasn't a bad season for this team. They had a couple of tough losses and a lot of big shootouts too. They beat Illinois 42-14, lost to North Carolina 39-59. They beat Miami on the road 30-28, so a couple of good wins there in September. They lost to BYU 49-66. That's one of those big shootouts that this team had last season, and that was a very common, thing of the season was for Virginia. This team just played a lot of high-scoring, competitive football games. They also lost to Pitt, who was the future ACC champion, 38-48, and they lost to Virginia Tech to finish out their season 24-29. So obviously a couple of tough losses during the season, but there's some high points too. They beat Louisville on the road. They shut out Duke 48-0. Also beat Georgia Tech in a very high-scoring game. And of course, they had a couple of just tough games there, like that Notre Dame game where they lost 28-3. They were in prime time for that game. That was a huge one, but obviously a couple of injuries and COVID kind of affected Virginia going into that matchup. But nonetheless, 6-6 was the record for this team last season. But looking forward to 2022 now, your roster preview going to next season. Brennan Armstrong is coming back, which, last season he had a good season for Virginia. He put up over 4,000 yards of passing, nearly 4,500 with 31 touchdowns, 10 picks, and a 65% completion rate. He also rushed for 250 yards and 9 touchdowns. Brennan Armstrong quietly had a really good season in 2021 statistically. He certainly improved off of 2020, and looking forward to 2022 here. Brennan Armstrong, the sky's the limit for him because in 2020 he was a pretty mediocre quarterback. Really, we didn't expect too much out of him, and he really didn't. He didn't come out and have a great season. If you look at his completion rate from 2020 to 2021, he had a 58% completion rate in 2020 and then a 65% in 2021. So he improved that by 7%. He also threw over 2,000 more yards, and his touchdown interception ratio was significantly better in the 2021 season. So Brennan Armstrong is a guy to really keep an eye on. If he can lower those interceptions just a bit more, he's really a quarterback to keep an eye on going into next season. Potentially one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC for sure. So they got him coming back. That's huge. You also got Wayne Talipapa, who's transferring out, which is obviously unfortunate. He was the top in the backfield for this team last season, even though he really didn't have a major impact. He put up 320 yards and 2 touchdowns. He didn't have a major impact, but at least he got Mike Collins coming back for some depth there in that backfield going into next season. Honestly, I'm not too concerned about the backfield. There's plenty of depth back there, even though you do lose Talipapa, your top in that position from last season. Receiving core, Dontavian Wicks is coming back. Same with Keaton Thompson and Billy Kemp. Your top 3 wideouts are coming back for next season, which is obviously huge. The receiving core was, it was great last season. Wicks put up over 1,200 yards. Thompson put up over 1,200 of total yards, over 900 of receiving. And, of course, if you look at Billy Kemp, over 700 yards of receiving and 6 touchdowns. So, all 3 of them had major impacts on this team last season. You do lose Rashawn Henry, your 4th in that receiving core, but he didn't have a major impact in comparison to the top 3. So, receiving core looks good. The backfield looks good. The quarterback position looks great to me. I really like Brennan Armstrong personally. I feel like he's a quarterback that, he improved from 2020 to 2021. If he can improve again going into 2022, this Virginia football team could quietly be a big contender in the ACC going to next season. I feel like this is a team that not many people are talking about, but this team shows some tremendous potential going into next season. You do lose 1 on the offensive line, so nothing too concerning. You lose 2 on the defensive line, 1 linebacker and 1 in the secondary. So defensively, you lose a couple of your key players, but most all teams are going to lose one or 2 of their key players defensively going into a season. But is this team a potential ACC contender in 2022, or is this team a major contender? Could they win an ACC title next season? I mean, I personally think this team is very much in contention to win that Coastal Division. The Coastal Division is wide open going into next season. There are 5 teams that could win that division easily. I feel like Virginia is obviously up there. Then you got North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Miami, obviously Pitt. So I mean, all 5 of those teams I could definitely see winning the division, especially. I'd say Virginia and Pitt. And I mean, once again, you can't even sleep on Miami though. So it's a very competitive division. And honestly, even if Virginia gets 9 to 10 wins, or if there's a Coastal Division team that gets 9 or 10 wins, they could very well win that Coastal Division. It's not going to take 11 wins to win that division this season. I mean, there's not going to be a huge standout team in that division, I don't think, but certainly I think Virginia is definitely up there to being one of my favorites, if not the favorite for me to win that Coastal Division going to next season. Your transfer portal and recruiting going to next year, Cody Brown, running back, he's coming in from Miami, so you bring in a few key players that could start next season. Obviously, Talipapa is off to Washington. Cameron Butler, edge rusher, is coming in from Miami, Ohio. You lose West Weeks, Milani, defensive lineman. Obviously, West Weeks, linebackers off to LSU. Milani's off to Washington State. Ryan Sawota is off to UCF. He's an offensive tackle. You bring in Jack Camper, defensive lineman from Michigan State, and you lose Noah Taylor, linebacker, to North Carolina. Otherwise, you lose an offensive tackle. He's in the transfer portal. I mean, you lose a few players from the offensive line. I mean, you lose multiple going into next season here. And, I mean, so that is a bit concerning, seeing the offensive line, losing a few in the transfer portal. So, I mean, that's maybe one of my main concerns for this team going into next season. Defensive lineman Jordan Redmond, he's in the transfer portal. Paul Keir, defensive end, is coming in from Columbia. And you lose Joshua Hayes, defensive back to K-State. Devin Chandler, receivers, off to Wisconsin, but he really didn't have too big of an impact on this team. And Joseph Bissinger, offensive tackle, is off to SMU, so another offensive lineman there. Recruiting-wise, 66th in the nation, 11th in the ACC, so nothing too outstanding. You got 1 4-star coming in and 14 3-stars, so nothing too outstanding in the transfer portal or recruiting, but I feel like this team, no matter what, is built for a pretty good season coming up here in 2022. That's also your schedule now going into next year. You got Richmond coming up in week 1, followed by road trip to Illinois in week 2. Old Dominion comes to town after that, and then Syracuse to finish out your September. In October, you got Duke on the road, Louisville, Georgia Tech on the road, and then Miami. And then in November, you got North Carolina at home, followed by Pitt, Coastal Carolina, and Virginia Tech. So, I mean, this is a Virginia team that really, you could have a really good record heading into November here. I mean, those games all the way up until October 29th are extremely winnable. I mean, this team very well. I mean, you get past Illinois on the road, which I think is an extremely winnable game for this team. I mean, you got Old Dominion, Syracuse, Duke, Louisville. Maybe Louisville's a bit of a challenge there. Georgia Tech, and then your last 5 games are a challenge. I will say that. Your last 5 games are going to be brutal. That's certainly going to be the most important part of your season there is your last 5 games, especially if you want to win that Coastal Division, because, I mean, you literally got Miami, North Carolina, Pitt, and Virginia Tech in 4 of your last 5 games. So you got your work cut out for you, and that's, you know, in your last 5 games there. But, I mean, those first 7 games are very winnable. I mean, this Virginia team could be 6-0 or even 7-0 to start off the 2022 season. It sounds crazy right now, but this team could be ranked pretty high heading into the later parts of October here. So this is a team to really keep an eye on. I've said this past offseason a few times. I mean, I'd be very surprised if I was wrong here. Looking at September, you got Richmond, easy win. Illinois on the road, I do think you win that game there. Old Dominion, easy win, and then Syracuse beat them as well. So you're 4-0 to start off your season here, which is a really good start. I mean, Richmond, Old Dominion, pretty confident you win those 2. Syracuse on the road, potentially a trap game there on a Friday night. You want to win that one. You also want to beat Illinois there. A Big Ten opponent, even though Illinois is probably going to be one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, if not the worst. So you're 4-0 heading into October. You got Duke on the road. I do think you beat Duke by a couple of touchdowns. They're just a mess of a team right now. And they got Louisville, which is, I do think Louisville next season, they could be decent. 7-9 wins. I do think is very reasonable for the Cardinals. I think you beat Louisville there. It's certainly a tough matchup. I think you lose to either Louisville or Georgia Tech. I do actually have you losing to Georgia Tech, which may surprise you, but going on the road there, I do think that's kind of a trap game there. You lose that one to Georgia Tech, even though that's a very winnable game. In either way, I feel like you're going to lose to either Louisville or Georgia Tech. You're probably not going to win both those games either way, because, I mean, Louisville's going to be a pretty good team next year. I really like Malik Cunningham. They're looking pretty good. So I'm not too confident you'll win both of those there, but I mean, 6-0, 7-0 start is very reasonable for this team, and I do have you beating Miami the next week. So I do have you beating the Hurricanes there, which would be a massive win. Miami's going to be pretty good next year. So I've got you 7-1 heading into November with a really good record, and I feel like this team, I mean, starting out the season 8-0 is very much possible. So, I mean, yeah, that would be an outstanding start. But November is a really tough month, your toughest month. I do think you beat North Carolina, which would be a huge win, but then you lose to Pitt and you lose to Virginia Tech in your last week. You do beat Coastal Carolina there in the middle, but certainly your November and your last 5 games are pretty challenging there. Even you could say your last 6, even though Georgia Tech is a very winnable game there. So you're 9-3 next season. I've got you 9-3, and I think 10-2 is also very reasonable for this team. I think 8 to 10 wins is your ballpark for next season, and it should be a good one for the Cavaliers. I'd be very surprised if I was wrong about this. I really like Brennan Armstrong and where he's headed. Plus the returning production, and this offense looks really good. I mean, this team is built for a great season coming up here in 2022. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on the Cavaliers, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.